Hi everybody! Well, it's a new story this week and it's taken from, ta-da, Boy, Tales of Childhood by Mr Roald Dahl, who of course we know for many a great book such as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, The Twits, James and the Giant Peach, Fantastic Mr Fox. Oh, the list goes on. Now I'm going to read you a couple of extracts from this. I'm going to read you some this week and I will leave it for next time as well, because it's a cracking section of the book that I'd like to share with you. And they're almost like short stories in that they are little snippets from his life. So I'm going to read to you one of my favourite ever parts of the book, but also probably one of my favourite ever stories, because I just think it's brilliant and it's great fun to read as well. So settle down, be quiet, I heard that. Naughty, you shouldn't be shouting out. No one shouted out, that's me in my pretend classroom. Okay, so this is called The Great Mouse Plot. My four friends and I had come across a loose floorboard at the back of the classroom, and when we prized it up with the blade of a pocket knife, we discovered a big hollow space underneath. This, we decided, would be a secret hiding place for sweets and other small treasures, such as conkers and monkey nuts and birds' eggs. Every afternoon, when the last lesson was over, the five of us would wait until the classroom had emptied. Then, we would lift up the floorboard and examine our secret hoard, perhaps adding something to it or taking something away. One day, when we lifted it up, we found a dead mouse lying among our treasures. Oh, it was an exciting discovery. Thwaites took it out by its tail and waved it in front of our faces. "What shall we do with it?" he cried. "Oh, it stinks," someone shouted. "Throw it out the window, quick." "Hold on a tick," I said. "Don't throw it away." Thwaites hesitated. They all looked at me. Now, when writing about oneself, one must strive to be truthful. Truth is more important than modesty. I must tell you, therefore, that it is I, and I alone, who had the idea for the great and daring mouse plot. We all have our moments of brilliance and glory, and this was mine. "Why don't we," I said, "slip it into one of Mrs. Pratchett's jars of sweets? Then, when she puts her dirty hand in to grab a handful, she'll grab a stinky dead mouse instead." The other four stared at me in wonder. Then, as the sheer genius of the plot began to sink in, they all started grinning. They slapped me on the back, they cheered me and danced around the classroom. "Ho-ho! We'll do it today!" they cried. "We'll do it on the way home." "You had the idea," they said to me, "so you can be the one to put the mouse in the jar." Thwaites handed me the mouse. I put it into my trouser pocket. Then the five of us left the school, crossed the village green, and headed for the sweet shop. We were tremendously excited. We felt like a gang of desperados setting out to rob a train or blow up the sheriff's office. "Now, make sure you put it into a jar which is often used," somebody said. "I'm putting it in the gobstoppers," I said. "The gobstopper jar is never behind the counter." "I've got a penny," Thwaites said, "so I'll ask for one sherbet sucker and one bootlace. And while she turns away to get them, you slip the mouse quickly in with the gobstoppers." And so everything was arranged. We were strutting a little as we entered the shop. We were the victors now, and Mrs. Pratchett was the victim. She stood behind the counter, her small, piggy little eyes watching us suspiciously as we came forward. One sherbet sucker, please, Thwaites said to her, holding out his penny. I kept to the back of the group, and when I saw Mrs. Pratchett turn her head away for a couple of seconds to fish out a sherbet sucker from the box, I lifted the heavy glass lid of the gobstopper jar, and I dropped the mouse in, and then I replaced the lid as silently as possible. My heart was thumping like mad, and my hands had gone all sweaty. And one bootlace, please, I heard Thwaites saying. When I turned round, I saw Mrs. Pratchett holding out the bootlace in her filthy fingers. I don't want all of you lot trooping in here if only one of you is buying, she screamed at us. Now, beat it! Get out! Go on, out! As soon as we were outside, we broke into a run. Did you do it? They shouted at me. Of course I did, I said. Well done you, they cried. What a super show. I felt like a hero. I was a hero. It was marvellous to be so popular. And there is the gobstopper jar, and on the top, can you see the dead mouse? Ah! Don't think she'll be too happy about that one. The flush of triumph over the dead mouse was carried forward to the next morning as we all met again to walk to school. Let's go and see if it's still in the jar, somebody said as we approached the sweet shop. Don't, said Thwaites firmly. It's too dangerous. Walk past as though nothing has happened. As we came level with the shop, we saw a cardboard notice hanging on the door. We stopped and stared. We'd never known the sweet shop to be closed at this time in the morning, even on Sundays. What's happened? We asked each other. What's going on? We pressed our faces up to the window to peer in and looked to see if Mrs. Pratchett was there. But she was nowhere to be seen. Look, I cried. The gobstopper jar's gone. It's not on the shelf. There's a gap where it used to be. It's on the floor, someone shouted. It's smashed to bits. There's gobstoppers everywhere. There's the mouse, someone else shouted. We could all see it. The huge glass jar smashed to smithereens, with the dead mouse lying in the wreckage and hundreds of many-coloured gobstoppers littering the floor. She got such a shock when she grabbed hold of that mouse that she dropped everything, somebody was saying. But why didn't she just sweep it all up and open the shop, I asked. Nobody answered me. We turned away and walked towards the school. All of a sudden, we began to feel slightly uncomfortable. There was something not quite right about the shop being closed. Even Thwaites, who was always able to offer a reasonable explanation, was unable to do so. We became silent. Each one of us had caught a whiff of it. The danger in the air, that is. Alarm bells were beginning to ring faintly in our ears. After a while, Thwaites broke the silence. She must have got one heck of a shock, he said. He paused. We all looked at him, wondering what wisdom the great medical authority was going to come out with next. After all, he went on, to catch hold of a dead mouse when you're expecting to catch hold of a gobstopper must be a pretty frightening experience. Don't you all agree? No Nobody answered him. Well now, Thwaites went on, when an old person like Mrs. Pratchett suddenly gets a very big shock, I suppose you know what happens next, don't you? No. What? We said, what happens? You ask my father, said Thwaites. He'll tell you. You tell us, we said. It gives her a heart attack, Thwaites announced. Her heart stops beating and she's dead in 5 minutes. 5 seconds. For a moment or two, my own heart stopped beating. Thwaites pointed a finger at me and said darkly, I'm afraid you've killed her. Me? I cried. Why just me? Well, it was your idea, he said, and what's more, you put the mouse in the jar. All of a sudden, I was a murderer. Wanted for murder. See, there's a poster that he's made, drawn into the book with his face on. That's probably Roald Dahl as a little boy. At exactly that point, we heard the school bell ringing and in the distance, and we had to gallop the rest of the way so as not to be late for school. Now, prayers were held first thing in the morning in the assembly hall. We all perched in rows on wooden benches while the teachers sat up on the platforms in the armchairs facing us. The 5 of us scrambled into our places just as the headmaster marched in, followed by the rest of his staff. The headmaster is the only teacher at Llandulph Cathedral School that I can remember, and for a reason you will soon find out about. Now, I can remember him very clearly indeed. His name was Mr. Coombs, and I have a picture in my mind of a giant man with a face like a ham and a mass of rusty-coloured hair that sprouted in a tangle all over the top of his head. Now, all grown-ups appear as giants to small children, but headmasters and policemen are the biggest giants of all and acquire a marvellously exaggerated stature. Now, it is possible that Mr. Coombs was a perfectly normal being, but in my memory, he was a giant. A tweed-suited giant who always wore a black gown over his tweeds and a waistcoat under his jacket. Mr. Coombs now proceeded to mumble through the same old prayers we had every day, but this morning, when the last Amen had been spoken, he did not turn and lead his group rapidly out of the hall as usual. He remained standing before us, and it was clear that he had an announcement to make. The whole school is to go out and line up around the playground immediately, he said. Leave your books behind and no talking. Mr. Coombs was looking grim. His hammy pink face had taken on that dangerous scowl, which only appeared when he was extremely cross and somebody was for the high jump. I sat there, small and frightened, among the rows and rows of other boys, and to me at that moment the headmaster, with his black gown draped over his shoulders, was like a judge at a murder trial. He's after the killer, Thwaites whispered to me. I began to shiver. I'll bet the police are already here, Thwaites went on. And the police car will be waiting outside. As we made our way out to the playground, my whole stomach began to feel as if it were slowly filling up with swirling water. I'm only 8 years old, I told myself. No little boy of 8 has ever murdered anybody. It's not possible. Out in the playground on this warm, cloudy September morning, the deputy headmaster was shouting, Line up in forms, year 6 over there, year 5 over there, so on. Spread out, get on with it, stop talking, all of you. Thwaites and I and my other 3 friends were in the second form, the lowest but one. That's like year 2. And we lined up against the red brick wall of the playground, shoulder to shoulder. I can remember that when every boy in the school was in his place, the line stretched right round the 4 sides of the playground. About 100 small boys altogether, aged between 6 and 12. All of us wearing identical grey shorts, grey blazers, grey socks and black shoes. "Stop the talking!" shouted the deputy head. "I want absolute silence." But why on earth were we in the playground at all? I wondered. And why were we lined up like this? It had never happened before. I half expected 2 policemen to come bounding out of the school to grab me by the arms and put handcuffs on my wrists. A single door led out from the school onto the playground. Suddenly, it swung open, and through it, like the angel of death, strode Mr. Coombs, huge and bulky in his tweed suit and black gown. And beside him, believe it or not, right beside him, stood the tiny, trotting little figure of Mrs. Pratchett herself. Mrs. Pratchett was alive! Oh, the relief was tremendous. "She's alive," I whispered to Thwaite, standing next to me. "I didn't kill her." Thwaites ignored me. "We'll start over here," Mr. Coombs was saying to Mrs. Pratchett. He grasped her by one of her skinny arms and led her over to where the year 6s were standing. Then, still keeping hold of her arm, he proceeded to lead her at a brisk walk right around the line of boys. It was like someone inspecting the troops. "What on earth's going on?" I whispered. Thwaites didn't answer me. I glanced at him. He had gone rather pale. "Too big," I heard Mrs. Pratchett saying. "Much too big. It's none of this lot. Let's have a look at them titchy little uns." Mr. Coombs increased his pace. "We'd better go all the way around," he said. He seemed in a hurry to want to get it over with now, and I could see Mrs. Pratchett's skinny goat's legs trotting to keep up with him. They had already inspected one side of the playground where the 6th form and the year 6s and the year 5s were standing. We watched them moving down the 2nd side and then the 3rd side. "Still too big," I heard Mrs. Pratchett croaking. "Much too big. Smaller than these. Much smaller. Where's them nasty little uns?" They were coming closer to us now. Closer and closer. They were starting on the 4th side. Every boy in our form was watching Mr. Coombs and Mrs. Pratchett as they came walking down the lines towards us. "Nasty cheeky lot, these little uns," I heard Mrs. Pratchett muttering. "They come into my shop and they thinks they can do what they bloomin' well likes." Mr. Coombs made no reply to this. "They nick things when I ain't looking," she went on. "But then they put their grubby little hands all over everything, and they got no manners. I don't mind girls. I never have no trouble with girls. But boys, whoop! Boys is hideous and horrible. I don't have to tell you that, do I, headmaster? Do I?" "These are the smaller ones," Mr. Coombs said. I could see Mrs. Pratchett's piggy little eyes staring hard at the face of each boy she passed. Suddenly, she let out a high-pitched yell and pointed a dirty little finger straight at Thwaites. "That's him!" she yelled. "That's one of them! I'd know him a mile away, the scummy little bounder!" The entire school turned to look at Thwaites. "What have I done?" he stuttered, appealing to Mr. Coombs. "Shut up!" Mr. Coombs said. Mrs. Pratchett's eyes flicked over and settled on my own face. I looked down and studied the black playground surface. "Here's another of 'em!" I heard her yelling. "That one there!" She was pointing at me now. You're quite sure? Mr. Coombs said. Of course I'm sure, she cried. I never forget your face, least of all when it's as sly as that one. He's one of 'em all right. There was 5 altogether. Now where's the other 3? The other 3, as I knew very well, were coming up next. Mrs. Pratchett's face was glimmering with venom as her eyes travelled beyond me down the line. There they are, she cried out, stabbing the air with her finger. Him, and him. That's the 5 of 'em, all right. We don't need to look no further than this, headmaster. They're all here, the nasty, dirty little pigs. You've got their names, have you? I've got their names, Mrs. Pratchett, Mr. Coombs told him. I'm much obliged to you. Oh, and I'm much obliged to you, headmaster, she answered. As Mr. Coombs led her away across the playground, we heard her saying, Right in the jar of gobstoppers it was, a stinking dead mouse, which I will never forget as long as I live. You have my deepest sympathy, Mr. Coombs was muttering. Talk about shocks, she went on, when my fingers caught hold of that dirty, nasty, sogging, stinking dead mouse. Her voice trailed away as Mr. Coombs led her quickly through the door into the school building. The next chapter is called Mrs. Pratchett's Revenge, and you will find out what happens next time. So for now, see you later.